What's the problem with 5G? We're a little over a week before France is due to deliver licenses as newly elected left and Green Party mayors leading a call for a moratorium. Well, now France's president telling a French tech conference that he's a fan of next-generation 5G technology. We'll listen in a moment to Emmanuel Macron's dig at, quote, the Amish model. And so, putting Puritan sects and COVID conspiracies aside, is there a health or environment risk linked to what's been billed as an acceleration to warp speed for wireless mobile networks? After a confinement period for the planet that highlighted our growing digital inequality, do the benefits outweigh the costs of 5G, particularly when it comes to security? There's a global leader in 5G, and it's got the might of the Chinese state behind it. Can Huawei be trusted with our data any more than private U.S. tech giants? Already, the UK has decided to phase out Huawei from its network. And on the day the new European Commission president delivered her first State of the EU address, what side does the continent take in what's part of a bigger battle between superpowers? Today in the France 24 debate, we're looking at the pros and cons of 5G. Joining us from Paris, Gilles Babinet, entrepreneur, vice chair of France's Digital National Council. Thanks for joining us.
Yeah, it's a pleasure.
Here in the
Thanks for having me.
Here in the studio, Comme Girchig, who is French UN Climate Youth Ambassador. You're also among those filing a class action lawsuit to get French mobile companies to disclose more about the environmental impact of their potential investment in 5G. We'll talk more about that in a moment. From Copenhagen, John Strand, CEO of Strand Consult. Welcome to the show.
Thank you for inviting me.
And I don't know if we say good morning or good evening from Honolulu, John Hemmings, Associate Professor at the Asia Pacific Center for Security Studies. How are you?
Good morning. Thank you for having me on the show.
The France 24 debate on Facebook and Twitter. The hashtag is F24debate. Yeah, it started with that weekend petition that was published. It was signed most notably by the leaders of the French Greens and the far left party, which called for a one-year delay in rolling out 5G. Among the points raised, it's urgent to question the sanitary impact of the multiplication of hyper-connected objects. Well, the response coming from Emmanuel Macron Monday evening at the French Tech Forum.
La France va prendre le tournant de la 5G parce que c'est le tournant de l'innovation. Et j'entends beaucoup de voix qui s'élèvent pour nous expliquer qu'il faudrait relever la complexité des problèmes contemporains en revenant à la lampe à huile. Je ne crois pas au modèle Amish. Et je ne crois pas que le modèle Amish permette de régler les défis de l'écologie contemporaine.
How'd you take that, Combe? Is it just a quip, just a joke?
I find that a bit strange to put in opposition like the Amish model and the 5G as if there was no middle between the two things. For me, we are in crucial need of debate on this question, and that's precisely what asked the elected people in the JDD last Sunday. And yes, it's a pity because in this quote he also mentions the Enlightenment spirit, like les Lumières in France. And for me, the Enlightenment spirit is to say, okay, we need clarity in the technologies we adopt, and today we just don't have enough clarity on these questions.
Don't have enough clarity on these questions, Gilles Babinet?
Yeah, I think it's two things to ask for, freezing any move towards the 5G and to ask for debates. I mean, obviously, we need some debates. We need to have transparency about the network consumption, the waves, and anything that could be of interest to the citizens in general, And I think it's probably tied to a custom in French, which is to have many things that comes from the top. We had something quite similar in the past, which was the electric meter, the smart meter, actually, which has raised a lot of opposition because people said that it was doing a lot of things. And it's still going on. A lot of people are trying to refuse to shift from a traditional to a smart meter. And it's something that we don't question enough. Why is that people so reluctant to do this type of things? And I think, if you look at it, France is probably one of the country which is the most vertical and the most Parisian driven, So this has to be denounced. But on the other hand, as you obviously know, I think it would be extremely dangerous to try to stop the 5G. Not only because I would say it's the normal, path of things, but mostly because what is different with 5G is that it's probably much more a B2B technologies, which is driving businesses in general. And we need this to be competitive in general. So I think it's not putting apart the environmental reason, which I believe are completely rational and that has to be considered. I think that we need it.
All right, John Strand. Can I ask you to play mediator here? You just heard there Gilles Babinet saying that, yes, the environmental concerns are real, but we have no choice. We have to move full steam ahead. It's the course of history with the meeting out of those new licenses.
I want to say the debate about 5G and radiation and people which are scared, we had exactly the same debate when we was discussing when the world was implementing 3G around year 2000. We saw exactly the same debate when 4G was launched about 11, 12 years ago, and we see exactly the same debate today. There's no difference between the arguments against the mobile networks and the technology from in 2020 versus in year 2000. But on the other side, I think it's very important we listen to the people which are concerned. There can be many reasons why they're concerned, and we need to create transparency, we need to create debate, we need to show that all the research which is made, like the Danish Cancer Institute have made a gigantic study of brain cancer across all Danes for the last, I think, more than 30 or 40 years, which is probably one of the biggest studies which ever made in the world. And basically, all the evidence we see is on the technology side, but on the other side, that's not the same as you should go out and hammer the people which are concerned in the head with the numbers. You have to listen to them and you'd have to take the debate.
All right, before I turn to John Hemmings, let's just remind our viewers here what 5G entails, because some say there's a big difference between going from 3G to 4G and going 4G to 5G. We're talking things like driverless cars, remote surgery. Proponents see a future that has wonder in it. At what cost? Claire Rush has more.
5G promises faster speeds, less lag when connecting to the network, and the ability to connect many devices to the internet without bogging it down. In the future, it could also connect self-driving cars and fuel new applications in telemedicine and virtual reality, essentially making what is already possible on our wireless devices better and faster.
5G is really just going to be doing the things we do today a little bit better. So what you can do on 4G and what you can do on Wi-Fi will get better because you'll have slightly faster speeds, a lot more capacity, so when there's lots of people and it's difficult to use data, that situation will improve. And over time, as the 5G standards evolve, you will get to the point where we'll have this thing called lower latency, which is basically how fast your data is travelling back and forward from the internet. And that is going to be important for some of the really interesting applications, like something as simple as a self-driving car.
Before we can all use 5G, however, wireless companies and phone makers have to upgrade. Phones need new chips and radio antennas, and wireless companies have to revamp their network equipment and install new antennas on cell phone towers and utility poles. But 5G is controversial. Some people believe the electromagnetic radiation emitted by devices such as cell phones can cause illnesses, including cancer. The World Health Organization, however, says no adverse health effect has been causally linked with exposure to wireless technologies. Meanwhile, on a geopolitical scale, the technology is also one front in rising tensions between the U.S. and China. Washington is lobbying its allies to exclude Chinese telecoms company Huawei from planned next-generation networks, citing national security risks. Huawei denies U.S. accusations that it might facilitate Chinese spying.
John Hemmings, we'll talk about the security concerns in a moment, but I just want your reaction here because Colm in the studio is shaking his head a lot. Your thoughts on whether or not France is, those in the opposition in France to the left are right in saying, let's have a one-year moratorium and study this a little more.
So I just to mention, by the way, I work for the U.S. government, but I'm speaking in my own capacity today. I think to have a debate, I'm not sure about a moratorium, but to have a debate, a national debate about 5G is important, not so much for the environmental reasons, which should be studied nevertheless, but also because 5G will be such a fundamental change. It will be the backbone of a whole new type of digital infrastructure. You'll have the fourth industrial revolution that will be built on that. And the ability of all these new downstream technologies, artificial intelligence, to collect and utilize and harvest our data will be that much greater. So I think there's going to be real repercussions on automation and workers. And there's going to be real repercussions on our data and how hacking, which is already an issue with the internet, could have much greater impacts on life and death situations like auto-driven vehicles.
So we've just come out, Colm Gilshaig, of this lockdown period with COVID, and we've been talking about it on this very show a lot, how the digital inequality has accelerated with the COVID lockdown. And some are looking at 5G as perhaps an antidote to that, saying, you know, if you live far from the capital now, you can maybe get that operation with a Paris doctor at a distance. You can have easier access to areas that are currently not off the grid, but poorly served by the grid.
But do you really believe that people who are currently not very well connected to internet will get benefits from 5G? I don't think so. It's incredible in the little show you just put on the screen that we talk about telemedicine, about autonomous cars and all that kind of stuff. But I call these people to come back on Earth. We have so many problems that should be tackled way before these technologies is so out of the ground. When for example, John says it's always the same debate. We had the same thing about 3G, about 4G. No, it's not the same thing. And we don't have to listen to citizens today. I mean, it's so, for me, I perceive this.
Well, you heard John Hemmings there saying that it's going to be a transformation for our society. There is a French member of parliament, Cédric Villani, who says he's going to present a bill on digital sobriety that he wants to see beforehand. What does that mean, digital sobriety? Digital sobriety means not do 5G, because we expect with 5G that people will consume until 50 to 60 gigaoctets per month. And this technology is made for that. If we want to have faster information, it means that we will have more consumption of data. So it's precisely the opposite that 5G will enable. And again, sorry to say that about the debate of 5G. We did not have the debate about 5G. Today, here, in 2 weeks, the 5G will be everywhere in France because the license will be delivered. Is this a real democratical debate to start it when it is commercialized all over France? Yeah, and at the end of last year, there was a convention on the environment, which you took part in.
Yes, exactly.
And the government heard that call for that moratorium.
Apparently, it didn't hear that call because this convention, climate convention in France, adopted a moratorium against 5G at 98% of the votes. It's one of the highest votes of this convention. They were opposed. 2 days after they adopted these conclusions, the president and his Ministry of Digital Question decided that the license agreement would be maintained as if nothing had been decided. So there's a clear misunderstanding between the population who never asked for, for telemedicine and autonomous car. But who wants this? No one. Go in the street and ask people, do you want autonomous cars? Except maybe if you are in the richest neighbors in Paris, yes, you will find people who want that. But go in the rural areas, go in the real France. That is not the priority of people.
Gilles Babinet?
I totally disagree. I think it's completely unwise to claim that we couldn't have a debate. First, the Green, all these people, they've been knowing that the license would be delivered by late September since 1 year. So they had plenty of time to create the debate if they wanted to. So I think that it's not really fair to say that we should have had this debate. And I'd say that, autonomous car, if I was really concerned about environment, it might be one of the best news, If you had autonomous car, it would mean that those cars, instead of working like 4% of the time, that could maybe operate like 20% of the time, which means a lot of saving of energy, of whatever externalities regarding the environment. So I think, I buy what regards, for instance, the video stuff. I think that we should have a debate on how to use these new technologies and not to make sure that we create additional usage that are not necessary, and taking into account the environment in general. But regarding the productivity gains, it's needed to save the planet. If we were to run this planet without the technology, the information technology, we would maybe need another planet. We need like 5 planets to make it work today, but it might be 7 or 8, whatever. So thanks to the technology, we've been able to synchronize much better the supply chain, the industry, and so on. I'll give you a very small example. If you were just to compare the load of trucks from 2000 to 2020, in 2020, it's 14% more loaded than 20 years ago. And that's only thanks to technology.
All right.
So that's exactly why I believe we shouldn't dismiss the potential of these technologies.
Gilles Babinet, we're going to have to go to a short break. We'll be right back. Stay with us. You're watching the France 24 debate. Welcome back, or welcome if you're just joining us. It's the France 24 debate as France gets set to roll out 5G. The opposition from the left, the Greens, they've been calling for a moratorium. No way, says the president, who's likened those who oppose the granting of these licenses to supporting the Amish model or oil lamps. We're talking about it with Gilles Babinet, Vice Chair of France's National Digital Council, who joins us from the French capital. In our studios, Comme Gershig, French UN Climate Youth Ambassador and the founder of Procès 5G, 5G court case, trial, which is a class action suit that you're filing against telecoms operators to give you the data on the environmental impact. Have they given it so far?
No, they refuse to give them.
All right, from Copenhagen, John Strand, consultant, CEO of Strand Consult, is with us as well. Thanks for being back with us from the Danish capital. And from Honolulu, John Hemmings, associate professor at the Asia Pacific Center for Security Studies. Let me ask you, John Strand, because you heard in part one of our discussion, John Hemmings mention how this is going to be life transforming, this move to 5G. When you hear this member of parliament, who, by the way, is a winner of the Fields Medal in mathematics, he's a scientist, say that he wants to present a bill on digital sobriety, that this acceleration of speed needs some thought. What is your reaction?
I think it's hilarious. I think it's absurd, some of the things we hear here. Let's be realistic. 4G and 5G is the same technology. It's LTE, long-term evolution. So there is some changes from 4G to 5G, but it is actually built on the same technology. We go from having stupid mobile networks to have much more intelligent networks, and that intelligent networks makes it possible to make new kind of services which can improve our daily life and actually have a huge impact on the climate and the way we use resources. So those people which are fighting for the green side, if they say 5G is bad, they are actually not fighting for the green side. 5G will be very important in the whole process of a more green Europe. That's one thing. And I think of course, we can sit down and reflect, and we can have all kind of philosophical discussions about is this good or bad, and self-driving cars. For me, it's not about self-driving cars, because self-driving cars is somewhere out very far away in the future, several years ahead, before we get to the point. There's still a lot of people in France driving around in a deux-chevaux. So I think it's very important to say, let's be a little bit more realistic, and let's look at facts, and let's have an evidence-based discussion. And the good news with 5G is that people in rural France, that's the cheapest way and the easiest way to ensure that those who don't have access to the internet in France can get access to it in the future. So there's no doubt about that 5G will be the technology which will help the digital divided people in France and in many other countries. In Spain, Telefonica will cover 75% of the country before the end of the year. In Denmark, where TDC launched a few days ago, they cover from day number 1 80% of the country, and they will cover 90% of the population before the end of the year. And that's just in very few months. So I think we have to be a little bit more realistic. And then
what about the energy cost, John Strand? What about the energy cost?
If we look at the energy cost of doing these things, let me say it in different ways. The energy of running the networks, a lot of telecom operators around the world is moving in a direction of being green and sustainable. So there is, Facebook have just been out saying it, Google have been out doing it, Verizon in the US have just been out saying that they will be totally carbon neutral before, I think it's 2025 or something like that. So a lot of networks is running on green energy today. So they invest in solar parks, windmill parks and stuff like that. So I don't see the energy consumption in the network as an issue. And at the same time, the network can save us energy. So what if all of us had to meet in Paris? And I was flying down to Paris today to participate in your program and then going back tomorrow. What would be the energy consumption of that? How much energy have we saved during COVID-19 because we've been able to make Skype calls and different kind of calls where we are sitting and working from home? I think COVID-19 have actually proved what telecommunication technology can do for society and how much carbon emission we can actually reduce over time just because we have access to this technology.
Now, when Combe-Girschig, I heard the leader of the French Greens, he didn't contradict what John Strand was saying. His objections, his reason for calling for this moratorium were more, and we're going to talk about it now, the security grounds, the fact that what's going to happen to our data, who's going to have control of it.
Exactly, yes. That's a very complex question, and that's part of our demand in the lawsuit. We ask operators to give us the measures they took to protect us against cybersecurity issues. Just a little thing about energy. Mr. John says, let's be realistic about energy. The European Commission has very clear objectives about the reduction of consumption in energy at 2030. It's 50% reduction of energy.
55 now.
Yeah, no, this is carbon. It's not energy. We have objectives on carbon. We also have objectives on energy. And today, 5G will consume more. And Mr. Roussat, the CEO of Bouygues Telecom, said in front of the French Senate that the 5G infrastructure as a whole will consume much more energy, and that is a quote.
But they say it'll be compensated by the fact that you'll be, as we just heard John Strand say, making fewer trips, and so your carbon footprint will go down.
There's no scenario proving this today, and I'm absolutely sure that we'll see the so-called Jevons effect, because it will get very easy to order things on internet and stuff. We'll just buy more things, and it will consume, in the end, much more.
All right, we're talking about this issue then of protection of data. Because of COVID, this week's long-expected EU-China summit moved online. It served as a reminder that while Europe doesn't have an army, it does carry clout as an economic powerhouse on its own, with its own demands when it comes to Beijing.
We expect that the market access barriers in China will be removed, especially for future and emerging digital technologies. They are the core of our economies. It's telecommunication, it's computer sectors, it's health, biotechnology, and the new energy vehicles and transport. We see that our investors just face too many barriers in these key sectors. And for us, with market access, it's not a question of meeting halfway, but it's a question of rebalancing the asymmetry and a question of openness of our respective markets.
Yeah, what you're hearing there is the questions we're having across this continent about the world number one player in 5G, China's Huawei. Back in July, the UK doing an about-face and declaring the phasing out of Huawei by the year 2028. As facts have changed, so has our approach, said the UK Telecoms Minister Oliver Dowden. Those facts brought home by the US decision to effectively, sanction Western firms who deliver key parts to China.
These are companies that were built on stealing American technology, bringing it back to the homeland, and then turning around and dumping it in the United States of America and around the world, and then bullying countries into accepting this technology. I think nations come to understand that when the Chinese show up and say that it's free, nothing could be further from the truth. They've now come to recognize the real costs connected with putting untrusted vendors in their systems. And over time, I think the world will come to recognize that's not the right path. And you will see Western technologies that are verifiable, trustworthy, and transparent come to dominate the telecommunications markets.
John Hemmings, Mike Pompeo promising that those Western firms that deliver key parts to Huawei will be able to make up the loss and sell them elsewhere. Is he promising what he can't deliver?
So I couldn't say whether he's making promises because everything's so fluid at the moment in terms of the relationship. But what I will say is that there are going to be costs that have to be borne by the West in reshaping the relationship with China. There's two trends that we're seeing here. One is a China that is using a kind of incremental form of economic warfare, essentially a very mercantilist made in China 2025 policy, subsidizing its companies, providing barriers for our companies to go into China. And at the same time, it's push on 5G, which is this revolutionary new wonder technology, which frankly, I support the technology. But I do agree with those who say there needs to be a debate about its repercussions and particularly the use of data. If these smart cities are going to be built by Huawei in France, you're walking down the street and your phone immediately is hooking up to their Wi-Fi on 5G. Is your data going to be safe? All these types of things need to be settled and discussed. And I think that, I hate to say it, it's not unusual for an American to say it, there needs to be more state oversight, more security services oversight, and not just letting the private companies decide these things for themselves.
Gilles Babinet, you agree?
Yeah, I think it's quite fair in general. We need to reset the rules, and we need to remind that the leaders in the telecom fields are European. Nokia and Ericsson are obviously European companies, and commonly they have like close to more than 50% of market share. So that's something we should be concerned of, because obviously the risk for this company to have their technology stolen by a third party is quite high. So it's also that we need to take into account. It's an opportunity to maintain our sovereignty, European sovereignty, and especially now that the networks are becoming completely wireless. Before we had, I would say, fixed technologies, and now it's mobile technologies. So the edge, and I would say the leaderships comes even more on these companies.
At the end of the day, is there a difference between Huawei having your data or US Silicon Valley giants having your data, Gilles?
Yeah, there is a big difference because on one hand you have a democracy, even though it's not perfect. Maybe you have seen that recently a court in the US recognized that Edward Snowden was right. So that's something that wouldn't happen in China. This guy exposed the fact that the NSA has spied illegally millions of people. So that's something which I believe has to make sense regarding the way we implement these technologies.
John Strand,
even though I'm quite critical of
John Strand, this issue of Huawei, is it about defending democracy, or is this just a commercial power play?
It's definitely not. Huawei is right now trying to sell a narrative that they are the innocent victim of a crazy American president which had a trade war with China. And that's so far from reality. This debate goes back to 2005. Obama administration, the first administration, did sanctions regarding Huawei. France did the first sanctions in 2012 regarding core networks and stuff like that. So this is about saying who's going to build the fundament for the digital society. And I always get the question, is Huawei dangerous? I said, I don't want to take a stand on that, but I could say, what is most vital infrastructure? The fighter planes we have in the Air Force or the telecommunication infrastructure? And people always say to me, that's telecommunication infrastructure. And then I say, if it's okay to buy Chinese telecommunication infrastructure, then it should be okay if NATO was buying Chinese fighter planes. And it's so simple.
And right now, when you look at the crossroads we're at, why is it that Nokia, Ericsson are not able to rival with Huawei?
Are able to Huawei. That's not true. That's a myth. Those two countries which was first and the leader in 5G is United States and Korea without using Huawei equipment. The one that Huawei is the leader in 5G, have most patents and all those things, that's a narrative with Huawei's communication people have put into the press. If you go to our website, you can order free a report where we take all the myths of Huawei and debunk them. We have to look at reality. The cost that they have claiming it cost a fortune is going to rip and replace it. Today, Plain Poland says that the cost of ripping and replace Huawei equipment in Poland will be marginal. We see that in all countries. We see Denmark, where TDC just have replaced the whole Huawei network. They're the first one to launch 5G in Denmark, ahead of those operators using Huawei. So we have to look at facts. And the problem is that Huawei have a giant propaganda machine using tons of resources to tell the narrative so that they still can sell their services here. But the reality is totally different than what a lot of people believe.
Tom Gierschig?
Yeah, I find this debate very interesting between Gilles, John, but I just fear that we take the debate at a step which is too far. Now we don't have to choose which 5G we need, the European one or the Chinese one. To have a wholesome debate, we should start from the beginning, which is, do we want the 5G? Do we believe in the promises of 5G? And I think that it would be, yes, wholesome to start by this. And I have a last question maybe to my colleagues here. It's who made the choice of 5G? Who?
John Hemmings, your thoughts?
Oh, it's a great philosophical origin story. I know the Chinese have driven 5G and subsidized Huawei and ZTE through their banks, and they are rapidly building up the infrastructure. I think it's a bit like, asking for the internet in the first place. You're going to be left behind if you don't do it. I do think, however, if we're going to do it, we have to do it responsibly. And when I say we are going to get left behind, I mean nation states, because if China builds its smart factories, just as its workers' salaries are going up, they're going to keep and maintain the cheap prices of goods, and they will dominate manufacturing for any other state that tries to compete. So I think in that area, we do have to compete.
And I'm, on that point, John, I'm reading reports that already the measures. I'm reading reports that already the measures put in place by the Trump administration that sanction those who deliver key components to Huawei, it's already putting a chokehold on Huawei's 5G efforts. Is that true?
Yes, they're supposed to be the ones who go abroad. ZTE is supposed to dominate the contracts at home, along with China Telecom and China Mobile. So Huawei is suffering a little bit, but I think they're going to dominate the developing world. Their play for the European market and the American market is, I'd say, stalling, and they've shot themselves in the foot with India. But as for Africa and other states where they will basically do contracts that no one can see, very good terms on developing the entire 5G infrastructure from the end user to core, a lot of countries will take it, I think.
Gilles Babinet, when the French government announces those licenses shortly, do you expect to see Huawei among those getting them?
It's unsure. It's not really clear how we want to deal with this. We made some extremely high requirements for the telcos to enter. And among these requirements, there is the security issue, which makes that I don't think that they would use Huawei as a core technology in these networks. It's more likely that they would go with the European vendors.
Comme Gershig?
I don't have anything to add on this point. About the technology we'll use, I think it's not the debate that we should have at this point of the year, 2 weeks before the license are agreed to the operators. It's too far as debate. We have to start by the basis. Do we need telemedicine, autonomous car, to unlock the question of climate? I don't think so.
But coming out of lockdown, your personal experience when you coming out of it in terms of we saw, for instance, those who were left behind, not just in rural areas, but also in urban areas, in working class neighborhoods, whose kids couldn't follow classes online when there were lockdowns. Again, will 5G? We've heard the argument made that 5G will help in that regard.
But do you really think that's the kind of society people want, to be locked at home? I don't think so. We were in an emergency issue, and we don't calibrate the infrastructure of a country on the ground of the emergency situation. No one wants to continue the life as if we were always in lockdown.
John Strand, you heard in part one of our discussion, Gilles Babinet describe the move to 5G as the march of history. Is the march of history also that that we just have to adapt to spending more and more and more time in front of screens?
Oh, I think actually we've spent the time in front of the screens more intelligent, and it's important that we provide companies with the technology. It's quite interesting because France was actually, I would always joking saying the internet was invented in France by Minitel. When France Telecom launched Minitel. And it's interesting to see, it sounds like that some people want to move back to a life with Minitel and where everyone is driving in 2CV. And the reality is the world looks different today. And the reality is that consumers want to have access to the internet. The reality is that we want to connect and make a more intelligent society. And when we move from 3G, 4G networks to 5G networks, we get intelligent networks. And that's the interesting thing with 5G. We can do things much smarter in the future than we did in the past. That's what's interesting. And then discussion about Chinese versus non-Chinese. Of course, we're going to support European vendors, But I think it's also important that we can see that the biggest pressure on telecom operators when it comes to not using Huawei, that's not coming from governments, that's coming from their corporate clients, which basically says, we don't feel it's nice to send our traffic to a Chinese network. We want to send it to a more safe network. And we see some operators today which have non-Chinese networks going out to corporate clients and saying, you have two choices, use our competitor, which have Chinese technology, or use our network, which have non-Chinese technology. Which network do you prefer to use? And that will also change a lot in Europe.
John Hemmings, in 5 years' time, will we be seeing a showdown between the EU and the United States on this?
In 5G technology, I can't see why. The US and EU have tended in telecommunications. Well, part of the reason we're here, why China has dominated, is that it's a state-driven strategy, mercantilist strategy. We ourselves have allowed all of our telecommunications vendors to be free market. And so you've seen antitrust against AT&T, you've seen Lucent fall, Nortel, the Canadian company, fell, Marconi, the British company, equipment maker, fell. I think as long as we agree on the free market principles, we won't disagree. But when a country comes in using state support, that's very anti-competitive for us. So that's where we agree, I think.
All right. We'll keep you around, John, for a debate about Boeing versus Airbus next time. I want to thank you so much for joining us there from Honolulu. I want to thank Gilles Babinet, Com Girschig, John Strand. We want to thank you for being with us here in the France 24 debate.